Today, we're taking Honda's cheapest and slowest entry-level dual sport, the XR150L, and completely transforming it into a more powerful, extremely capable, yet still budget-friendly motorcycle. But in its current stock form, it's gonna need a lot of help. And that help is coming from right here, in the form of cardboard boxes containing brand new upgrades specifically made for this bike.
Now, all of these parts are from a website called Scooter Swap Shop. And as far as I know, they're one of the first companies in the United States to offer aftermarket upgrades for this bike, especially as Honda only started selling this bike in the US 2 years ago.
We have a plethora of upgrades here. There's gonna be links for everything I install on this bike in the description if you wanna check it out yourself. Scooter Swap Shop sent all this stuff out to me. This video is not sponsored, they're not paying me, but they did provide these parts so I could basically test out their full range of upgrades for the XR150L. There's a performance exhaust in here. There's a kickstart kit with everything you need to convert the bike to kickstart. A 220cc big bore kit. This is a 150. We're going to 222, so we're gonna be making some more power. We got air filters. We got racing CDIs. They sent me basically everything I could ever dream of to completely transform that bike right there. So I think we're gonna start with the simplest mod first, a chef's kiss of a mod on a brand new motorcycle, an upgraded exhaust.
Now, one thing I plan to do throughout this build is to actually performance test this bike after adding each set of mods. And hopefully I can find out which modifications make the biggest difference. That way you guys watching at home that want to build a bike similar to this can decide on what upgrades to do and what upgrades to skip. But that means that before we install this aftermarket exhaust, we need to get a baseline of how the stock bike performs. So let's start with a sound test of the stock exhaust. So we know how it sounds, but now let's find out how much power or lack thereof does this bike actually make.
Bone stock XR150L. We're just gonna take a slight right from this red light here. Basically give her the beans the whole way. This is a slight uphill, so this is just a complete rough estimate to see how long it takes this bike in each iteration to go 0 to 60 miles an hour. Okay, here we go.
So we were off on the baseline test to see how quick this bike really is. We hit 45 miles per hour in 11.18 seconds. Not very impressive.
53, man, this is uphill, so it's not really fair, but 54, 53, we're losing speed.
This hill was definitely making the bike struggle.
Now we're cresting the hill here. We're gonna start picking up 55, 56, 57, 58, 59, 58, 59, 60. That was baseline 0 to 60.
So hopefully that gives you some more insight on the power of this bike in its stock form. It can cruise at highway speeds, but as soon as there's any sort of hill or headwind, it will start to struggle. But maybe we can change that. So let's start by removing these plastics and taking off the stock exhaust. From what I can see, it should be fairly simple to take this stock exhaust off. There's just the 2 bolts up here in the head of the cylinder. There's a bolt here to the frame and then a bolt to the rear subframe here. And there's just like one clamp holding the 2 pieces together. So it shouldn't be too hard. We can get these loose, take it off, and throw the new one on. So like I said, I'm gonna start by removing the bolts that hold the stock exhaust on. From there, I made sure that the clamp that holds the header portion of the exhaust to the muffler was loose so I could wiggle it apart and separate it. The header could then be removed and I could start to fit up the new stainless steel exhaust. It uses the same factory mounting locations, so it should install pretty easily. And I'm also going to use some high heat liquid gasket in any of the connection points to make sure there's no exhaust leaks. This exhaust is 3 pieces and it comes with these springs to help make sure that there's tension kept on all of the connection points. And just like that, this exhaust installation is complete. Before we start up the XR with this brand new, beautiful exhaust, I wanted to thank the sponsor of today's video, Simply Carbon Fiber. Simply Carbon Fiber is a company that provides a wide range of products, all made out of real carbon fiber. On their website, they have everything from wallets, jewelry, sunglasses, watches, phone cases, and even suitcases. Personally, I can't think of a harder way to flex walking around the airport than with a full carbon fiber suitcase. Dang. I have both the Blue Flake and standard carbon fiber phone cases, and on top of just looking good, these things have actually done a really good job of protecting my phone while I work around the garage. They have phone cases for just about every model of smartphone, even older phones, which is nice because I have an iPhone 12 and this thing fits perfect. And their cases also work great with MagSafe accessories and wireless charging, which works great for me because my old phone is busted and my charging port doesn't even work anymore, so I have to use the wireless charging and it works flawless. If you're interested, you can check them out at simplycarbonfiber.com/2stroke and use the code TST10 for 10% off your order. So once again, thanks to Simply Carbon Fiber for sponsoring this video. The link to their website is in the description. Now, let's get this bike started.
Before I do anything else, I want to start this thing up just to see, only swapping the exhaust, how much difference it makes, how much better does it sound. Whoa, dude. Oh man, it sounds, whew, oh my gosh. It sounds so much meaner, it's crazy. The main reason why one of the first things people do to their bikes almost every time is an exhaust modification is because the stock exhausts, they're just giant, chunky things that restrict so much airflow, really only for emissions reasons and to make them quiet. Stock bikes have to meet certain emission standards, and their exhaust also has to be within a certain decibel limit, which I'm sure most of you guys know. The sound is one of the main reasons why people love motorcycles. So an exhaust mod like this, you get more sound, you get rid of this chunky, heavy piece of crap, and you get more airflow through the engine, which increases your power the slightest amount. But speaking of airflow, the exhaust isn't the only restricting area on stock bikes. The next bottleneck most of the time is going to be the air box of the bike, and that's why we have this high flow air filter right here.
This S23 air filter is another new product from Scooter Swap Shop. This thing is basically like a K&N high flow air filter, and it's a direct replacement for the stock XR150L filter. From the factory, this airbox comes with this restrictor installed, and you can actually take it off really easily, throw it away, and it's a free mod for more airflow. So now I'm just gonna dig deeper, get access to the stock air filter, and swap it out with the new S23 filter. The new filter comes with some double-sided tape and a foam gasket that you'll have to install yourself. Going from the stock paper air filter to this new high-flow one should do a really good job allowing more air into the intake while still keeping this bike safe. And here I am installing that double-sided tape to make sure that the foam gasket seats properly. The foam can then be secured into place and the filter can be installed back in the bike. And being that it is a direct replacement for the stock filter, the reinstallation was simple. So now there's only one thing left to do. I have to button up the airbox, put the seat and the plastics back on the bike, and get this thing back out on the road to see how this air filter and exhaust setup improve things. And like I said earlier, I'm not expecting huge performance gains from this, but I do know it's gonna make the bike sound a whole lot better.
Exhaust is on. It's already starting to blow up because it's fully heated up now. It sounds so much better. I'm gonna do a quick 0 to 60 here. Downshifts. Ooh. All right, here we go.
It was finally time for the 0 to 60 speed test with the new exhaust installed. And I think it's important to note that I haven't adjusted the carburetor at all to take advantage of the increased airflow, which actually resulted in a slower time.
I think it's safe to say the exhaust really has minimal to no performance gains, but it sounds so much better. Just having that like hearty, deep tone underneath you when you rev it, it just makes the whole bike feel way better. Like overall, big enjoyability gain for sure. So it's so much more fun. So just like that, the exhaust is on. It sounds so much better. It looks so much better. The metal is already starting to get a really cool color on it just from it heating up and going through some heat cycles, and it sounds good, so I can't complain. But the next mod is gonna be even better. This is by far the one I'm most excited for, and it's all in this box right here. This is the 222cc big bore kit.
This is exactly how the kit comes from Scooter Swap Shop, and it has everything you need to upgrade your bike from 150 cc's to a 222 cc 70mm piston setup.
Obviously, before we install this new cylinder and piston, I need to tear the bike down enough to get access to the engine so I can remove the existing components to put these ones on. Now, I've actually never worked on a 4-stroke engine before, but I heard it's really not supposed to be that complicated, so this is either gonna make this installation look really easy or it's gonna make me look really dumb.
So once again, we have to start by tearing off all the plastics from this bike to get easy access to the engine. And on top of that, I'm also going to remove the gas tank. And before I tear into the engine at all, I'm going to try my best to clean all the dust and debris off of the frame and surrounding areas to make sure no contaminants get inside the engine. From there, we can remove the exhaust header and the carburetor. Now I'm going to remove the spark plug and check how the bike was running. It looks like it's a pretty golden brown, so to me, I'd say it looks good. And then to remove the last thing in the way of this engine, all the emissions equipment stored at the front of the bike needs to come off. And with that worthless pile of junk removed, we could start to disassemble the engine. Starting with the top motor mounts that hold on the valve cover. With these removed, we can go ahead and take the valve cover off to expose the cam chain and the cam. And here you can see the cam chain, the cam, and the valves. All the things that make a 4-stroke way more complicated than a 2-stroke.
Before we disassemble this engine any further, you want to make sure that it's set to top dead center, which means the piston is all the way at the top of its stroke. So as far as I know, in order to get to top dead center on this bike, you can remove these 2 plugs and actually turn the motor with a 19mm socket right through this hole. Then you can look through this hole and there should be a marking that basically shows up and lines up with a notch in here when you're at top dead center. There's 2 markings on the cam chain sprocket as well, and you want to turn it until those get parallel with the top of the top end right here as well. So those are the 2 things you want to do to make sure it's at top dead center. And then the valves should have a little bit of play in them, and that play basically means that all the tension is off the valves and you're at top dead center. Once you do that, you want to keep it there. You can remove everything else, install the new stuff, and put the cam chain back on, and you're still in the same position.
And as night fell on the shop, I began to crack into the motor to get ready for the big bore install, starting by removing the cam chain tensioner and the bolts that hold the cam gear on. I realize now, watching this back, that you really should put some sort of towel inside the motor underneath this gear and bolts when you're removing them, because if you drop them into the bottom end of the motor, you're screwed. Luckily, I didn't have any butterfingers here. I held onto the bolts and used a zip tie to secure the cam chain. From there, I could remove the 4 bolts that hold the cam onto the top end. And there's also 2 additional bolts on the left side of the motor holding the head to the cylinder. With those removed, I could take off the cam assembly, exposing the valves. And that freed up the rest of the top end so I could take it out and expose the cylinder. And now we can see the piston clearly at top dead center, the cam chain, and the plastic cam chain guides. So now it's time to take the stock cylinder off. You have to be a little bit careful removing this to make sure the chain guides and chain clear it freely as you pull it off. Looks like I already got a little wiser as well, using a shop towel to protect the bottom end of the motor while I take the circlips off the piston. From there, you can simply tap the wrist pin out and the piston comes off.
We got the head and the cylinder taken out, the piston is off, and now it's time to install the new 222cc cylinder. I'm really eager to see the power gains that this thing is gonna give us, but before I get too excited, I gotta put it back together properly. I'm a little nervous, but the disassembly wasn't that bad, so let's see how this goes.
When you put these 2 cylinders side by side, you can see there's an obvious difference. The new piston setup is a lot bigger, but luckily this cylinder actually bolts directly onto the crankcase and there's no machining or modifications necessary. The first thing we have to do is put the piston rings onto the piston. Once the rings were on, I could install the piston onto the crankshaft using the wrist pin and secure it by installing the circlips. From there, we could install the bottom cylinder gasket. Before I install the cylinder, I want to make sure it's nice and lubed up with some engine oil. And then we can go ahead and install the cylinder, making sure not to crush the timing chain or the plastic chain guides. And just like that, the cylinder is on. We can now put on the top gasket and start to assemble the top end again. I made sure to take good notes while I disassembled everything, so when I went to put it all back together, I knew exactly where every bolt went. And after putting the cam assembly back into the top end, I looked up the torque specs for all the bolts to make sure everything was tightened to OEM specifications. The last thing to do was to reinstall the gear on the timing chain and make sure that this thing didn't slip timing at all during the reinstallation of the cylinder.
I'm pretty sure I have everything back together the way it's supposed to be, but I'm gonna go ahead and turn over the motor just to see how it sounds.
And I actually think it sounded okay. So now, in order to close up the rest of the engine, I needed to install the cam chain tensioner. And with that tightened up, I turned the motor over once more just to make sure everything still sounded all right. I think we're in the clear, everything sounds good, so it's time to install the plugs back on the side of the motor and put the valve cover back on. And with that, I can torque the final bolts and the motor build is complete. But before we can start the bike, I have to reinstall all the supporting components, starting with the top engine mounts. And now we have to get the pesky emission system put back on the bike. I think my plan is to eventually delete all these components because they're not really necessary, but for now, they're gonna stay. And then what's left is the carburetor, the exhaust, and the fuel tank. And after tightening up the last bolt, we could roll the bike out of the garage and see how it starts.
I'm really hoping everything's good.
Well, everything was not good. You see, I'm pretty sure I put the motor back together fine, but the
Battery's dead.
and the bike was absolutely refusing to start.
Are you kidding me, bro?
So I let it charge for a couple of hours and tried again. But due to this bike sitting over the winter, I don't think the battery can hold a charge anymore.
This freaking battery, dude. Oh, man. So my wallet may be $100 lighter, but this is a pretty necessary component to get the bike to start. So let's throw this thing in.
So obviously, step one was to remove the original battery. And luckily, a local battery shop had the exact size battery I needed to replace the stock one, so I went and got it. And after cleaning some light surface rust on the terminals, I installed the new battery, and we were good to go.
All right, attempt number 2.
And the bike actually fired up.
I'm not letting go of this throttle. I'm gonna keep it cracked open until the thing really warms up.
There was a lot of white smoke initially, but as the bike warmed up, it slowly went away.
Smoke disappeared. All that extra oil probably burned off.
And after slightly tweaking the idle on the carburetor, the bike was running perfect.
There you go. All I did was raise the idle screw. We got idle. Let's go. It actually sounds pretty healthy, I'm not gonna lie. I'm just gonna let it warm up.
And with the big bore kit finally installed, all that we had left to do was to test this bike out. But unfortunately, that's where we ran into problems.
All right, 222cc, big bore, 0 to 60. Let's see what we get here.
So right off the bat, the bike did not feel any more powerful than it was before. Our 0 to 45 mile per hour time with just the exhaust and airflow mods was 11.08 seconds. And now with the big bore installed, we had an additional 72 cc's of motor, but we actually got a 0 to 45 time of 11.09 seconds, which means the bike was actually 0.01 seconds slower. And as you can see here, even as we kept going, we actually never reached 60 miles per hour, with our top speed being 57 miles per hour going downhill. And after all the work we did, I know this bike can do better.
Something is definitely wrong here. I just installed a big bore kit, a high performance exhaust, and a high flow air filter. And this bike is actually slower, and I think I know why. Since I installed this big bore kit, I upped the jetting a little bit in the carburetor, but not much. And I've actually found some recommended jetting for this setup online, and it's a good bit bigger than what I currently have in here. We introduced so much more air into this system. The piston's bigger, pulling in and out more air. The exhaust is higher flowing. The air filter's higher flowing. I think it's running really lean. So we need to install some larger jets to make sure that this new setup is getting the right amount of fuel. And the other thing is, when I installed this big bore kit, I decided to not touch the top end. I actually still have the stock cam in this top end here. The way that Scooter Swap Shop gets the most performance out of this big bore kit is by using a performance cam. So I'm gonna go ahead and put that performance cam in the top end, make sure that the valve clearances are all good. We're gonna up the jetting a good bit to make sure that the bike is getting enough fuel, and then we're gonna run it again and hope to see a giant power increase. Currently it sounds amazing and it feels faster, but it's definitely not. And that's 100% my fault. I don't think it's jetted right. It's not running as it should right now. So let's tear this thing down, address those problems, and then run it back, because I know this thing can make some power.
So with all that said, it felt like we were back to ground zero, taking the plastics off this bike to tear into the motor once again. But at least this time we have some experience, so it should be a bit easier. I got the bike set up back at top dead center and began removing the cam gear, being careful once again to not drop any of the bolts into the motor. With the gear out of the way and the chain zip tied, I could remove the bolts holding the cam assembly to the motor. And now it was time to install the brand new upgraded S23 cam from Scooter Swap Shop. If you didn't know, an upgraded cam basically allows the engine's valves to stay open for longer, which allows each stroke of the engine to bring in more air and fuel and push out more exhaust gas. With the upgraded 222cc piston that we installed, this will help the motor run even more efficiently and create more horsepower. So it was out with the old and in with the new. I made sure to use engine oil to lubricate the bearings thoroughly, as well as the cam lobes that would come in contact with the valves. The new cam slid right into the assembly, and I could install the retainer and torque the bolt to spec. And just like that, the new cam was installed and I could secure it back inside the engine. Once again, making sure to torque all the bolts to their factory spec. And the last thing to do was to check the valves to make sure that the clearances were okay. And once I had them adjusted, I put the valve cover back on and the engine was good to go. So now it's time for the final test. This is gonna be all or nothing. Either the modifications worked and this bike is a good bit faster now, or I'm a terrible mechanic. But right away, I could tell things were feeling a lot better. We hit 45 miles per hour in 9.22 seconds, which is about 2 seconds faster than previous. And we hit 60 miles per hour in 41 seconds, which is by far our fastest time. So when we compare all of the 0 to 60 times, the stock bike took 51.21 seconds. 58.06 seconds with the exhaust and high flow air filter, literally never when we installed the big bore kit, and our fastest time of 41.06 seconds once we installed the upgraded cam and properly jetted the carburetor.
So what do you guys think? Was it all worth it? Honestly, I think it was. Shaving an entire 10 seconds off your 0 to 60 time is actually a really big deal if you think about it. According to Google, to significantly reduce your 0 to 60 time by 10 seconds, you would need to likely add several hundred horsepower. So it's safe to say the modifications worked. All jokes aside though, the modifications that we did on this bike really shine in the torque department. 0 to 60 tests are fun, but this bike was never designed for high speed or highway riding. The torque improvements that all these mods provided are hands down the main reason why I would suggest doing this. It basically takes this thing from being a smooth, calm, off-road capable bike and kind of turns it into a monster. The main reason I made this video was to see if I could take the cheapest dual sport motorcycle you could buy and make it perform way better while still keeping it in a budget-friendly category. This bike I purchased out the door for $3,600, and the mods that we installed in this video were a total of $572.98, which would bring the total cost of this bike to $4,172.98 for a 222cc dual sport motorcycle. If you wanted to compare that to other bikes on the market, the Kawasaki 230S, which is basically the same engine size, has an MSRP of $5,000, and once you add the destination charge, the dealership fees, and taxes, it comes out to basically $6,000. The Honda CRF 300L is basically their step-up dual sport from this one, and that thing, after all taxes and fees, is around $6,700. So this XR, in its current form, after the modifications, is still about $2,000 cheaper than its closest competition. And in my mind, if you want to save money and also have fun modifying your bike,
this is the way to go. This isn't gonna be the last video with the XR. I still have a lot more parts to put on it from Scooter Swap Shop. But guys, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like, hit the subscribe button. We're almost at 100,000 subscribers, which is insane. I'm hoping this video might push me over the limit so I can put a plaque on my wall, but we'll see about that. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.